Question 1. The audit findings indicate that a key third-party vendor providing essential IT infrastructure services to Aeroports de Paris has failed to consistently adhere to the data security protocols stipulated in their contract and Aeroports de Paris's internal security guidelines. Considering the potential impact on airport operations and passenger data, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Aeroports de Paris management? Option A. Instruct the IT operations department to manage the situation internally without further external consultation, prioritizing operational continuity above all else. Option B. Initiate a formal review of the vendor's compliance, engaging with the vendor to understand the extent of the non-compliance and to develop a corrective action plan, while simultaneously assessing the operational risks of continued engagement. Option C. Immediately terminate the contract with the vendor to mitigate any further security risks, regardless of the operational impact. Option D. Acknowledge the audit findings but continue with the current service provision, assuming the vendor will rectify the issues independently. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal review of the vendor's compliance, engaging with the vendor to understand the extent of the non-compliance and to develop a corrective action plan, while simultaneously assessing the operational risks of continued engagement. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of maintaining robust internal controls and compliance with Aeroports de Paris's regulatory framework. The audit findings highlight a potential breakdown in the established processes for managing third-party vendor relationships, which could expose the company to significant risks, including data security breaches, financial irregularities, and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to determine the most appropriate course of action that upholds both operational continuity and regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented review of the vendor's compliance with contractual obligations and relevant Aeroports de Paris policies, followed by a risk-based decision on continued engagement. This approach is right because it directly addresses the audit findings by investigating the root cause of the non-compliance. It aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management, which are fundamental to Aeroports de Paris's operational integrity and its obligations under French aviation regulations and internal control frameworks. Specifically, it upholds the duty to ensure that all third-party service providers operate within the established legal and operational parameters, thereby safeguarding Aeroports de Paris's assets and reputation. An incorrect approach would be to immediately terminate the contract without a proper investigation. This fails to acknowledge the potential disruption to critical airport operations and may lead to unnecessary legal or financial repercussions. It also bypasses the due diligence required to understand the extent of the non-compliance and whether it can be rectified. Another incorrect approach would be to overlook the audit findings and continue business as usual, assuming the issues are minor or will resolve themselves. This demonstrates a disregard for internal audit processes and regulatory oversight, creating a significant compliance risk and potentially exacerbating any underlying problems. It violates the principle of accountability and the obligation to address identified control weaknesses. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate the decision-making entirely to the operational team without involving the compliance or legal departments. While operational efficiency is important, it should not supersede the need for expert assessment of regulatory and legal implications. This approach risks making a decision that is operationally expedient but legally or ethically unsound, failing to leverage the specialized knowledge required for robust risk mitigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the facts, assessing risks against regulatory requirements and internal policies, consulting relevant stakeholders, e.g., legal, compliance, risk management, and documenting all decisions and their justifications. This structured approach ensures that actions are not only effective but also compliant and ethically sound. Question 2. During the evaluation of a proposed expansion project at Aeroports de Paris, which approach best balances the company's operational objectives with its regulatory obligations and stakeholder interests? Option A. Prioritize the project's immediate financial benefits and operational efficiency, proceeding with minimal consultation to avoid delays. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive stakeholder analysis to identify all affected parties and proactively engage them in dialogue to understand and address their concerns throughout the project lifecycle. Option C. Implement the expansion based on internal technical assessments, providing information to stakeholders only after key decisions have been finalized. Option D. Focus consultation efforts primarily on major airline partners, as their operational needs are paramount to the airport's success. The correct answer is A. Prioritize the project's immediate financial benefits and operational efficiency, proceeding with minimal consultation to avoid delays. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Aeroports de Paris, as a public entity operating critical infrastructure, faces heightened scrutiny regarding its procurement processes and stakeholder engagement. Balancing the need for efficient operations with the legal and ethical obligations to diverse stakeholders, including passengers, airlines, local communities, and regulatory bodies, requires careful judgment. The question probes the understanding of how to navigate these complex relationships within the specific regulatory framework governing Aeroports de Paris. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with all identified stakeholders to understand their concerns and expectations regarding the proposed infrastructure development. This aligns with principles of good governance, transparency, and potentially specific French administrative law requirements for public consultations and environmental impact assessments, which often mandate stakeholder involvement. Such engagement fosters trust, allows for early identification and mitigation of potential conflicts, and can lead to more robust and widely accepted project outcomes. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible corporate citizenship and adherence to the spirit of regulations that promote public interest. An incorrect approach that prioritizes only immediate operational efficiency without considering stakeholder input risks legal challenges, public opposition, and reputational damage. This could violate administrative procedures requiring public consultation or environmental impact studies that necessitate stakeholder feedback. Focusing solely on the financial benefits for Aeroports de Paris, to the exclusion of broader societal impacts or the concerns of affected parties, would be ethically questionable and potentially non-compliant with regulations designed to protect public interest and ensure fair process. Ignoring the concerns of local communities, for instance, could lead to delays due to legal injunctions or protests, ultimately hindering operational efficiency. Similarly, failing to adequately consult with airlines might result in operational disruptions if their needs are not met, impacting passenger experience and Aeroports de Paris's revenue streams. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant French legal and regulatory landscape governing public infrastructure projects and stakeholder engagement. This should be followed by a comprehensive stakeholder analysis to identify all relevant parties and their potential interests. A proactive communication and consultation strategy should then be developed, ensuring that feedback is genuinely considered and integrated into project planning where feasible. This iterative process of engagement, analysis, and adaptation is crucial for navigating complex projects responsibly and effectively. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that a new, unapproved technology is being proposed for passenger screening at Aeroports de Paris, which promises to significantly speed up throughput. As a manager responsible for security operations, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with aviation security regulations? Option A. Rely on the vendor's assurances that the technology is compliant and authorize its immediate integration into existing screening processes. Option B. Proceed with a limited trial of the technology in a non-critical area, observing its performance without formal regulatory consultation to gauge its effectiveness. Option C. Initiate a thorough review of the proposed technology against all applicable Aeroports de Paris security protocols and relevant national and European aviation security regulations, consulting with the relevant authorities for approval before any deployment. Option D. Immediately approve the technology for deployment to enhance passenger experience and operational efficiency, assuming it meets general security standards. The correct answer is D. Immediately approve the technology for deployment to enhance passenger experience and operational efficiency, assuming it meets general security standards. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in large organizations like Aeroports de Paris. balancing the need for efficient operations with the imperative to uphold stringent safety and security regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to interpret and apply complex regulatory frameworks in a high-stakes environment where any lapse can have severe consequences for public safety, national security, and the reputation of Aeroports de Paris. Careful judgment is required to ensure that operational expediency does not compromise regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a proactive and collaborative engagement with the relevant regulatory bodies and internal safety departments. This means not only understanding the existing regulations, but also seeking clarification and guidance when faced with novel situations or potential ambiguities. By initiating dialogue and seeking expert input, an individual demonstrates a commitment to compliance and a responsible approach to risk management. This aligns with the overarching principles of aviation safety and security, which prioritize a culture of vigilance and continuous improvement, often mandated by regulatory frameworks governing airport operations. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate operational needs over regulatory consultation would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the established legal and safety protocols designed to protect passengers, staff, and infrastructure. Such an approach risks contravening specific articles within the relevant aviation security and operational regulations, potentially leading to significant penalties, operational disruptions, and reputational damage for Aeroports de Paris. Another incorrect approach, that of assuming existing procedures are always sufficient without seeking updates or clarification, is also flawed. Regulations are dynamic and subject to change. Relying on outdated knowledge or assumptions can lead to non-compliance, even if unintentional. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to maintain the professional competency required in a regulated industry. A further incorrect approach, that of deferring responsibility entirely to subordinates without providing clear guidance or oversight, is a dereliction of duty. While delegation is important, ultimate accountability for regulatory compliance rests with leadership. This approach undermines the establishment of a strong compliance culture and can lead to inconsistent application of rules and increased risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the regulatory context. Clearly understand which specific regulations apply to the situation. 2. Assess the risk. Evaluate the potential consequences of non-compliance. 3. Seek expert advice. Consult with internal legal, safety, and security departments, and if necessary, external regulatory bodies. 4. Document all decisions and communications. Maintain a clear record of the process and rationale. 5. Implement and monitor. Ensure the chosen course of action is compliant and effective. Question 4. Performance analysis shows a significant increase in passenger volume at Aeroports de Paris, leading to longer queues at security checkpoints. A supervisor, under pressure to improve passenger throughput, suggests temporarily relaxing a specific, non-critical security screening step for a short period to expedite boarding for a flight with a tight turnaround. What is the most appropriate course of action for an Aeroports de Paris employee in this situation? Option A. Adhere strictly to all established security screening protocols as per Aeroports de Paris operational guidelines and relevant French aviation regulations, regardless of passenger volume or flight turnaround times. Option B. Proceed with the security screening as usual, but inform passengers that delays are due to operational pressures and that Aeroports de Paris is working to resolve them. Option C. Implement the supervisor's suggestion to temporarily relax the specific security screening step to improve passenger flow and meet the flight's turnaround time. Option D. Escalate the concern about passenger volume and potential delays to the security management team, requesting additional resources or a review of staffing levels, while continuing to apply all security protocols. The correct answer is A. Adhere strictly to all established security screening protocols as per Aeroports de Paris operational guidelines and relevant French aviation regulations, regardless of passenger volume or flight turnaround times. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Aeroports de Paris employees due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the strict adherence to regulatory frameworks governing airport operations and passenger safety. The need to balance immediate operational demands with long-term compliance and stakeholder trust requires careful judgment. The correct approach involves prioritizing the immediate safety and security protocols as mandated by Aeroports de Paris's operational guidelines and relevant French aviation regulations. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the primary responsibility of airport personnel, ensuring the safety and security of all individuals within the airport environment. Adherence to established protocols, even when they might cause temporary inconvenience or perceived inefficiency, is a non-negotiable aspect of aviation safety and is legally mandated. Failure to follow these protocols could lead to significant security breaches, passenger harm, and severe regulatory penalties for Aeroports de Paris. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on expediting passenger flow without fully verifying security procedures would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the established safety and security regulations, which are designed to prevent potential threats. Such an approach risks compromising the integrity of the security screening process, potentially allowing prohibited items or individuals to pass, thereby violating Aeroports de Paris's duty of care and French aviation security laws. Another incorrect approach, which involves bypassing a specific security check due to perceived low risk or time constraints, is also professionally unacceptable. This action undermines the systematic nature of security protocols, which are designed to be comprehensive and applied universally. It introduces an element of subjective judgment into a process that requires objective adherence to rules, creating a vulnerability that could be exploited. This directly contravenes the principle of consistent application of security measures, a cornerstone of aviation security. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding and unwavering commitment to the established operational procedures and regulatory requirements. When faced with a conflict between immediate operational pressures and safety protocols, the decision-maker must first consult the relevant Aeroports de Paris guidelines and French aviation law. If there is any ambiguity, seeking clarification from supervisors or the relevant safety and security departments is paramount. The guiding principle should always be the paramount importance of safety and security over expediency. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that Aeroports de Paris is developing a new passenger flow optimization strategy. Considering the diverse interests of passengers, airlines operating at its facilities, airport employees, and local communities, which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical considerations for a public service operator like Aeroports de Paris? Option A. Prioritizing the strategy's implementation based on the most vocal stakeholder groups' demands, without a systematic analysis of broader impacts. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive stakeholder consultation process involving passengers through surveys and feedback mechanisms, airlines through dedicated working groups, employees via internal forums, and local community representatives through public information sessions to inform the final strategy. Option C. Deferring stakeholder engagement until after the strategy has been fully implemented and operational issues arise, at which point a reactive communication plan will be activated. Option D. Implementing the strategy based on internal operational efficiency data and consulting with key airline partners only, with minimal public disclosure. The correct answer is D. Implementing the strategy based on internal operational efficiency data and consulting with key airline partners only, with minimal public disclosure. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that Aeroports de Paris, as a public service provider and a key infrastructure operator, must adhere to stringent regulatory frameworks governing its operations, particularly concerning stakeholder engagement and transparency. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient decision-making with the imperative to uphold public trust and regulatory compliance. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that all relevant stakeholders, including passengers, airlines, employees, and local communities, are considered, and that their concerns are addressed in a manner that aligns with the principles of good governance and operational integrity, as defined by French aviation regulations and relevant EU directives. The correct approach involves a proactive and inclusive stakeholder engagement strategy. This means actively seeking input from diverse stakeholder groups, transparently communicating Aeroports de Paris's strategic decisions and their potential impacts, and establishing clear channels for feedback and grievance redressal. This aligns with the regulatory expectation for public entities to operate with a high degree of accountability and to foster a collaborative environment that supports the long-term sustainability and public acceptance of airport operations. Adherence to these principles ensures that Aeroports de Paris not only meets its legal obligations, but also builds stronger relationships with those it serves and impacts. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term cost savings or operational expediency over comprehensive stakeholder consultation. For instance, adopting a reactive approach where stakeholder concerns are only addressed after they escalate into public complaints or regulatory scrutiny represents a failure in proactive governance. This can lead to reputational damage, operational disruptions, and potential sanctions for non-compliance with regulatory mandates that emphasize public interest and stakeholder rights. Another incorrect approach would be to engage in superficial or tokenistic consultation, where feedback is solicited but not genuinely considered or acted upon. This undermines the principle of transparency and can be perceived as a deliberate attempt to circumvent regulatory requirements for meaningful engagement, thereby eroding trust and potentially leading to legal challenges. Professionals at Aeroports de Paris should employ a decision-making framework that integrates stakeholder analysis into the strategic planning process from the outset. This involves identifying all relevant stakeholders, understanding their interests and potential impacts, and developing tailored engagement plans. Regular review and adaptation of these plans based on evolving stakeholder feedback and regulatory landscapes are crucial. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both operational objectives and the broader public interest as mandated by the regulatory environment. Question 6. Governance review demonstrates that Aeroports de Paris is facing pressure to expand its cargo handling capacity to meet increasing demand. However, the review also highlights a potential conflict with the company's stated commitment to reducing its carbon footprint and preserving local biodiversity. Considering the regulatory framework governing French airport operations and environmental protection, which of the following approaches best balances these competing priorities for Aeroports de Paris? Option A. Immediately initiate the expansion project based on projected demand, deferring detailed environmental impact assessments until after construction is underway to avoid project delays. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that rigorously evaluates potential effects on carbon emissions and biodiversity, and integrate findings into a revised expansion plan with robust mitigation and offsetting measures, ensuring full compliance with French environmental law and relevant EU directives. Option C. Prioritize the expansion by seeking expedited regulatory approval for a scaled-down version of the project, focusing solely on economic benefits and addressing environmental concerns only if explicitly mandated by regulators after the project is operational. Option D. Proceed with the expansion using existing infrastructure and operational adjustments without undertaking new environmental studies, assuming that the scale of the project does not warrant a full assessment under current regulations. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate the expansion project based on projected demand, deferring detailed environmental impact assessments until after construction is underway to avoid project delays. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate operational needs of Aeroports de Paris with the long-term strategic implications of its environmental commitments, all within the specific regulatory framework governing French airport operations and environmental protection. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying these regulations to a novel situation, ensuring compliance while also fostering sustainable development. Careful judgment is required to avoid decisions that could lead to regulatory penalties, reputational damage, or hinder the company's stated environmental goals. The correct approach involves prioritizing the development of a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that adheres strictly to the guidelines set by the French Ministry for the ecological transition and the specific environmental regulations applicable to Aeroports de Paris. This assessment must proactively identify potential environmental risks associated with the proposed expansion, propose mitigation strategies, and ensure that any new infrastructure aligns with the company's sustainability objectives and relevant EU directives on environmental protection. This is the best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and corporate social responsibility, safeguarding the company from legal repercussions and enhancing its public image as an environmentally conscious operator. It directly addresses the core of the governance review's findings by embedding environmental considerations into strategic decision-making. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the expansion based solely on economic projections, without a thorough environmental review. This fails to comply with the mandatory environmental impact assessment requirements stipulated by French law and EU environmental directives, potentially leading to significant fines and legal challenges. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial mitigation measures that do not adequately address the identified environmental risks. This would be a failure of due diligence and could result in ongoing environmental damage, further regulatory scrutiny, and a breach of Aeroports de Paris's stated commitment to sustainability. Finally, delaying the environmental assessment indefinitely while proceeding with preliminary construction phases would be a clear violation of regulatory timelines and a disregard for the precautionary principle inherent in environmental law, exposing the company to severe penalties and reputational harm. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. This involves consulting relevant legislation, ministerial guidelines, and internal company policies. The next step is to identify the specific stakeholders affected by the decision and their concerns. In this case, environmental agencies, local communities, passengers, and employees are key stakeholders. The decision-making process should then involve a rigorous assessment of potential impacts, followed by the development and evaluation of various mitigation and adaptation strategies. Finally, the chosen course of action must be transparently communicated and demonstrably aligned with both legal obligations and the company's strategic objectives, particularly its environmental commitments. Question 7. Compliance review shows that Aeroports de Paris is considering engaging a new technology provider for enhanced passenger flow management systems. Before finalizing the contract, what is the most appropriate next step to ensure adherence to Aeroports de Paris's internal compliance framework and relevant French aviation regulations? Option A. Proceed with the contract based on the provider's reputation and standard contractual clauses, assuming all compliance requirements will be met. Option B. Delegate the compliance review entirely to the legal department without active involvement from the operational and security teams responsible for the new system. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to identify potential conflicts of interest, data privacy concerns, and security vulnerabilities, and to ensure alignment with Aeroports de Paris's compliance policies and French aviation laws. Option D. Request a brief overview of the provider's existing compliance certifications, without a detailed review of their operational integration or potential risks specific to Aeroports de Paris. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to identify potential conflicts of interest, data privacy concerns, and security vulnerabilities, and to ensure alignment with Aeroports de Paris's compliance policies and French aviation laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with strict adherence to Aeroports de Paris's internal compliance framework and relevant French aviation regulations. The core difficulty lies in identifying and mitigating potential conflicts of interest that could arise from a new service provider's operations within the airport environment. A robust impact assessment is crucial to proactively identify these risks before they materialize, ensuring that Aeroports de Paris upholds its integrity and regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and systematic assessment of the new service provider's activities against Aeroports de Paris's established compliance policies and relevant French aviation laws. This includes scrutinizing potential conflicts of interest, data privacy implications, security protocols, and any potential for unfair advantage or preferential treatment. The justification for this approach lies in its proactive nature, its alignment with the principles of good governance and regulatory compliance expected of a major airport operator, and its commitment to maintaining a fair and secure operational environment. Specifically, French aviation law and Aeroports de Paris's internal codes of conduct mandate rigorous due diligence for all third-party service providers to prevent corruption, ensure fair competition, and protect passenger and operational data. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the new service provider without a thorough impact assessment, relying solely on the provider's assurances or assuming that standard contractual clauses are sufficient. This failure to conduct a specific impact assessment is a direct contravention of due diligence requirements. It risks overlooking subtle but significant compliance breaches, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial assessment that only considers the most obvious risks, ignoring less apparent but equally critical areas like data handling or indirect influence. This superficiality fails to meet the standard of care expected in a highly regulated industry and could leave Aeroports de Paris vulnerable to unforeseen compliance issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk-based approach. This begins with identifying all relevant internal policies and external regulations. Next, a detailed understanding of the proposed service and its operational integration is required. This understanding then informs the development of a tailored impact assessment framework, focusing on potential compliance gaps. Finally, the findings of the assessment must be translated into actionable mitigation strategies, with clear responsibilities assigned for their implementation and ongoing monitoring. Question 8. Compliance review shows that Aeroports de Paris is considering implementing a new, advanced baggage tracking system that utilizes passenger identification data to enhance efficiency. What is the most appropriate initial step to ensure compliance with data protection regulations regarding this new system? Option A. Proceed with implementation and address any potential privacy concerns that arise during operation. Option B. Conduct a thorough data protection impact assessment (DPIA) to identify and mitigate potential privacy risks before deployment. Option C. Rely on existing general data privacy policies to govern the new system's operations. Option D. Perform a brief technical feasibility study and assume privacy compliance if the technology is secure. The correct answer is A. Proceed with implementation and address any potential privacy concerns that arise during operation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to balance operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory requirements concerning the handling of sensitive passenger data. The core difficulty lies in identifying and mitigating potential privacy risks within Aeroports de Paris's data processing activities, particularly when new technologies are introduced. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any new system or process does not inadvertently lead to non-compliance with data protection laws. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive impact assessment, specifically a Data Protection Impact Assessment, DPIA, as mandated by relevant data protection regulations. This approach is right because it systematically identifies and evaluates the risks to individuals' rights and freedoms arising from data processing operations. By conducting a DPIA before implementing the new baggage tracking system, Aeroports de Paris would be able to identify potential privacy concerns, assess their severity, and implement appropriate mitigation measures to ensure compliance with data protection principles, such as data minimization, purpose limitation, and security. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect passenger privacy and the legal requirement to demonstrate accountability for data processing. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation without a formal assessment. This failure stems from a disregard for the principles of privacy by design and by default, which are fundamental to data protection. It also represents a failure to comply with regulatory obligations that mandate DPIA for high-risk processing activities. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial review that only considers technical feasibility without adequately assessing the privacy implications for passengers. This would overlook potential risks such as unauthorized access, data breaches, or the secondary use of passenger data beyond its intended purpose, leading to regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Relying solely on existing, potentially outdated privacy policies without a specific assessment for the new system is also an inadequate response, as it fails to address the unique risks associated with the new technology and its specific data flows. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This begins with identifying potential data processing activities, assessing their necessity and proportionality, and then determining if a DPIA is required based on the level of risk. If a DPIA is necessary, it should be conducted thoroughly, involving relevant stakeholders, and its findings should inform the design and implementation of the processing activity. Continuous monitoring and review of data processing activities are also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and adapt to evolving risks and regulations. Question 9. Compliance review shows that Aeroports de Paris is planning to implement a new, advanced baggage handling system provided by an external vendor. This system will integrate with existing passenger information systems to optimize baggage routing and tracking. What is the most appropriate initial step for Aeroports de Paris to ensure compliance with data protection regulations regarding the personal data processed by this new system? Option A. Rely solely on the vendor's assurances that their system is compliant with all relevant data protection laws. Option B. Assume that since the system is for operational purposes, no significant personal data is processed, and therefore no specific data protection review is necessary. Option C. Conduct a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, specifically for the new baggage handling system and its data processing activities. Option D. Proceed with the implementation and address any data protection issues that may arise post-deployment. The correct answer is C. Conduct a data protection impact assessment, DPIA, specifically for the new baggage handling system and its data processing activities. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with stringent regulatory compliance, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive passenger data within the Aeroports de Paris operational framework. The core difficulty lies in identifying and mitigating potential data privacy risks that might arise from third-party service providers, even when those providers are engaged for seemingly routine operational tasks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that Aeroports de Paris upholds its legal obligations and maintains passenger trust. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive data protection impact assessment, DPIA, that specifically scrutinizes the data handling practices of the new baggage handling system provider. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, as mandated by relevant data protection regulations applicable to entities operating within the European Union, which govern Aeroports de Paris. A DPIA systematically identifies and assesses the risks to individuals' rights and freedoms concerning the processing of personal data, allowing for the implementation of appropriate safeguards before any data processing begins. This ensures that Aeroports de Paris not only complies with its legal obligations, but also demonstrates a commitment to safeguarding passenger privacy, thereby mitigating the risk of regulatory penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because the provider is a reputable company and the system is for baggage handling, no significant data privacy risks exist. This overlooks the fact that baggage handling systems often process passenger data, such as flight information, destination, and potentially personal identifiers linked to baggage tags. Failing to conduct a DPIA in such a scenario represents a regulatory failure to adhere to data protection principles that require such assessments for processing, likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. Another incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire responsibility for data protection compliance to the third-party provider, without independent verification. While the provider must comply with data protection laws, Aeroports de Paris, as the data controller, retains ultimate accountability. This approach constitutes an ethical failure to exercise due diligence and a regulatory failure to ensure that personal data is processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently under its own purview. A further incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation and only address data protection concerns if a specific complaint arises. This reactive stance is a significant regulatory and ethical failing. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to proactive risk management and places passengers at risk of data breaches or misuse without adequate preventative measures. It also exposes Aeroports de Paris to substantial penalties for non-compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic risk-based approach. This begins with identifying all potential data processing activities, especially those involving third parties. For each activity, an assessment of the potential risks to data subjects should be conducted. Where risks are deemed high, a formal DPIA should be initiated. This process should be documented and any identified risks should be mitigated through technical and organizational measures before data processing commences. Continuous monitoring and review of data processing activities are also crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and adapt to evolving risks. Question 10. Investigation of a proposal to temporarily reduce the number of security screening lanes at a key terminal of Aeroports de Paris during off-peak hours to reallocate staff to other operational areas, requiring an assessment of its compliance with French aviation security regulations and relevant EU directives. Option A. Implement the reduction in screening lanes and monitor passenger wait times, making adjustments only if passenger complaints exceed a predefined threshold, without a formal review of the underlying regulatory compliance. Option B. Seek informal guidance from a neighboring airport security manager regarding their practices during off-peak hours and adopt a similar approach, assuming that common operational challenges lead to consistent regulatory interpretations across different airport authorities. Option C. Proceed with the reduction in screening lanes, relying on the judgment of experienced security supervisors to maintain adequate oversight and ensure that passenger throughput remains acceptable, assuming that off-peak hours inherently present lower security risks. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment, meticulously cross-referencing the proposed reduction in screening lanes with specific articles of the French Civil Aviation Code, Code de l'Aviation Civile, and relevant EU regulations, e.g., Regulation EC No. 300/2008 and its implementing acts, to ensure no compromise to mandated security standards and passenger screening requirements. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment, meticulously cross-referencing the proposed reduction in screening lanes with specific articles of the French Civil Aviation Code, Code de l'Aviation Civile, and relevant EU regulations, e.g., Regulation EC No. 300/2008 and its implementing acts, to ensure no compromise to mandated security standards and passenger screening requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Aeroports de Paris employees due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the imperative to maintain robust security protocols. The need to expedite passenger flow during peak periods can create pressure to bypass or streamline security checks, which directly contravenes the stringent regulatory framework governing aviation security. Careful judgment is required to balance the demands of passenger experience with the non-negotiable requirement of safeguarding the airport environment and its users. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and security integrity above all else. This means systematically evaluating any proposed change to security procedures against the established legal and regulatory requirements for airport operations in France. It necessitates understanding the specific articles of the relevant French aviation security laws and European Union (EU) regulations that govern passenger screening, baggage handling, and access control. The justification for this approach lies in its adherence to the principle of safety first, which is a cornerstone of aviation regulation. Any deviation from established protocols, even if seemingly minor or intended to improve efficiency, must be demonstrably compliant with or demonstrably not in conflict with these regulations. This proactive assessment ensures that Aeroports de Paris maintains its license to operate and upholds its duty of care to passengers and staff. An incorrect approach would be to implement changes based solely on perceived operational benefits without a formal impact assessment against regulatory frameworks. This could lead to inadvertent breaches of security regulations, potentially resulting in significant fines, operational disruptions, and reputational damage for Aeroports de Paris. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal assurances or past practices that are not explicitly validated against current regulations. This demonstrates a failure to understand the dynamic nature of aviation security legislation and the need for continuous compliance verification. A third incorrect approach would be to delegate the assessment of regulatory impact to individuals without the requisite expertise in aviation security law, leading to a superficial or inaccurate evaluation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the proposed change and its intended benefits. Second, identify all relevant regulatory frameworks, including French national laws and applicable EU regulations pertaining to airport security. Third, conduct a detailed impact assessment, cross-referencing the proposed change with specific regulatory requirements. This assessment should involve consultation with legal and security experts within Aeroports de Paris. Fourth, document the findings of the impact assessment, including any identified risks and proposed mitigation strategies. Finally, obtain formal approval from relevant authorities before implementing any changes that could affect security procedures. Question 11. Compliance review shows that a proposed streamlining of passenger data processing at Aeroports de Paris may inadvertently impact the accuracy and timeliness of reporting to aviation authorities. What is the most appropriate next step to ensure regulatory adherence? Option A. Proceed with the streamlining immediately to improve operational efficiency and address any reporting discrepancies that arise later. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for assessing reporting accuracy to the operational team responsible for the streamlining, assuming they understand the requirements. Option C. Postpone the streamlining indefinitely until all potential reporting issues can be definitively resolved, even if it means significant operational delays. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment to identify all potential compliance risks and develop mitigation strategies before implementing the streamlining. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the streamlining immediately to improve operational efficiency and address any reporting discrepancies that arise later. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between operational efficiency and the stringent requirements of regulatory compliance, specifically concerning data handling and reporting within the context of Aeroports de Paris. The need to balance immediate operational demands with long-term legal and ethical obligations requires careful judgment. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough impact assessment that prioritizes identifying all potential regulatory breaches and their consequences before implementing any changes. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of robust risk management and due diligence mandated by regulatory frameworks governing aviation and data protection. Specifically, it ensures that Aeroports de Paris fulfills its obligations to identify, assess, and mitigate risks associated with noncompliance, thereby safeguarding its operational integrity and reputation. This systematic process allows for informed decision-making, ensuring that any proposed operational adjustments are compliant and that necessary corrective actions are planned and executed effectively. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational benefits without a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment fails to uphold the duty of care and adherence to legal obligations. This could lead to inadvertent breaches of data privacy regulations, reporting requirements, or security protocols, exposing Aeroports de Paris to significant fines, legal challenges, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that delays or underestimates the regulatory implications of operational changes risks creating a culture of noncompliance. This can result in a reactive rather than proactive stance, making it harder to rectify issues and potentially leading to systemic failures in governance and oversight. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This framework should include 1. Identifying the proposed operational change. 2. Mapping out all relevant regulatory requirements, e.g., data protection, aviation security, financial reporting. 3. Assessing the potential impact of the change on each regulatory requirement. 4. Identifying and quantifying risks of noncompliance. 5. Developing mitigation strategies. And 6. Seeking expert legal and compliance advice before implementation. This ensures that decisions are grounded in a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape and potential consequences. Question 12. Compliance review shows that a senior manager at Aeroports de Paris has been offered a high-value, branded item of merchandise by a supplier who is currently bidding on a significant contract. The manager is considering accepting the item as a gesture of goodwill. What is the most appropriate approach for the manager to take in this situation? Adhering strictly to Aeroports de Paris's internal compliance framework and relevant French aviation regulations. Option A. Decline the item politely, citing company policy on gifts and hospitality, and inform the supplier that all contract discussions will proceed based on merit and objective criteria. Option B. Accept the item but ensure it is not displayed publicly and is kept for personal use, assuming this mitigates any perception of influence. Option C. Accept the item as it is a common business practice and the supplier's intentions are likely benign. Option D. Accept the item and then report it to the compliance department for their review and potential approval after the fact. The correct answer is C. Accept the item as it is a common business practice and the supplier's intentions are likely benign. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with strict adherence to Aeroports de Paris's internal compliance policies and relevant French aviation regulations. The core difficulty lies in identifying and mitigating potential conflicts of interest or undue influence that could arise from accepting gifts or hospitality, even if seemingly minor. A robust impact assessment is crucial to proactively identify these risks before they materialize into compliance breaches or reputational damage. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented impact assessment that systematically evaluates the nature of the gift or hospitality, the relationship with the donor, and the potential for it to influence decision-making or create an appearance of impropriety. This aligns with the principles of good governance and ethical conduct expected of employees within a regulated entity like Aeroports de Paris. Specifically, it would involve consulting Aeroports de Paris's internal code of conduct and any applicable directives from the French Civil Aviation Authority, DGAC, regarding gifts and hospitality for personnel in positions of responsibility. The assessment should consider whether accepting the item could be perceived as a bribe, a conflict of interest, or a breach of trust, and whether it could undermine public confidence in Aeroports de Paris. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the gift without proper consideration, assuming its low value negates any risk. This fails to acknowledge that even small gestures can establish a pattern of acceptance that erodes ethical boundaries and can be interpreted as a willingness to be influenced, bypasses the necessary due diligence and documentation required by internal policies and regulatory expectations for transparency and accountability. Another incorrect approach would be to accept the gift solely based on the donor's perceived good intentions or long-standing relationship. While relationships are important, they do not supersede compliance obligations. This approach neglects the objective assessment of potential impact and the appearance of impropriety, which are critical in a regulated environment. It prioritizes personal relationships over institutional integrity and regulatory adherence. A third incorrect approach would be to accept the gift and then attempt to retroactively justify it. This demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and a failure to adhere to the principle of seeking approval or guidance before accepting potentially problematic items. It suggests a disregard for established procedures and a potential attempt to circumvent scrutiny. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Aeroports de Paris's internal policies on gifts, hospitality, and conflicts of interest. When faced with such a situation, an employee should first identify the potential risks, consult relevant internal guidelines and regulations, and if there is any doubt, seek clarification or approval from their supervisor or the designated compliance officer. Documentation of the assessment and the decision-making process is paramount for demonstrating due diligence and accountability. Question 13. When evaluating potential new security screening technology for Terminal 2F at Aeroports de Paris, which approach best aligns with French public procurement regulations and the company's commitment to operational efficiency and public safety. Option A. Proceed with the procurement based solely on the lowest initial purchase price, without a comprehensive evaluation of long-term maintenance costs, operational integration challenges, or vendor support capabilities. Option B. Immediately select the technology proposed by a long-standing trusted supplier, assuming their offering is the most efficient and reliable to expedite deployment before the peak travel season. Option C. Initiate a limited, informal consultation with a few preferred technology providers to gauge interest, and then negotiate a direct contract to secure the chosen solution quickly. Option D. Conduct a detailed impact assessment that includes a review of compliance with the Code de la Commande Publique, an analysis of potential operational benefits, environmental considerations, and a transparent evaluation of shortlisted vendors based on predefined criteria. Correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed impact assessment that includes a review of compliance with the Code de la Commande Publique, an analysis of potential operational benefits, environmental considerations, and a transparent evaluation of shortlisted vendors based on predefined criteria. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Aeroports de Paris, as a public entity operating critical infrastructure, must adhere to stringent French public procurement regulations and EU directives to ensure fairness, transparency, and value for money in its contracting processes. The decision-making process requires a nuanced understanding of these legal frameworks, balancing operational needs with legal obligations. A failure to comply can lead to legal challenges, financial penalties, reputational damage, and delays in essential projects. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented impact assessment that considers all relevant stakeholders, potential environmental consequences, and compliance with French public procurement law, Code de la Commande Publique, and relevant EU directives. This assessment must be objective, evidence-based, and transparent, forming the foundation for a justifiable decision. It ensures that Aeroports de Paris acts in accordance with its legal duties to promote competition, prevent corruption, and achieve the best possible outcome for the public interest. An incorrect approach that prioritizes expediency over due diligence would fail to adequately consider the legal and ethical implications. For instance, selecting a contractor based on informal relationships or perceived speed without a formal, competitive tender process directly violates the principles of public procurement, which mandate equal treatment and transparency. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the lowest bid without considering the contractor's capacity, past performance, or the long-term value, could lead to project failure and financial waste, contravening the obligation to secure the most economically advantageous tender. Lastly, an approach that neglects to assess potential environmental impacts or social consequences, even if legally compliant in procurement terms, would be professionally deficient, as it fails to consider the broader responsibilities of a public operator. Professionals at Aeroports de Paris should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining project objectives and scope. This should be followed by identifying all applicable legal and regulatory requirements, including those related to public procurement, environmental protection, and safety. A comprehensive impact assessment, considering various options and their potential consequences, should then be conducted. This assessment should be reviewed by legal and relevant technical experts. The final decision should be documented, justified by the assessment findings, and communicated transparently to relevant parties, ensuring adherence to the principles of good governance and public accountability. Question 14. Compliance review shows that Aeroports de Paris is considering implementing a significant upgrade to its baggage handling system. This upgrade involves integrating new technology that could potentially alter the scope of existing service contracts and introduce new operational efficiencies. What is the most appropriate approach for Aeroports de Paris to ensure adherence to French regulatory frameworks governing public procurement and administrative law? Option A. Proceed with the upgrade by classifying it as a minor amendment to existing contracts, assuming that the overall operational objective remains the same, to expedite implementation. Option B. Directly award a new contract to the incumbent provider of the current baggage handling system, citing their familiarity with Aeroports de Paris's infrastructure as a primary justification. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to evaluate the proposed upgrade against the Code de la Commande Publique and relevant administrative laws, identifying any requirements for a new procurement procedure or contract modification. Option D. Initiate informal discussions with a select group of technology providers to gauge their interest and capabilities without launching a formal market consultation process. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to evaluate the proposed upgrade against the Code de la Commande Publique and relevant administrative laws, identifying any requirements for a new procurement procedure or contract modification. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Aeroports de Paris, as a public entity operating critical infrastructure, must adhere to stringent French administrative law and public procurement regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient operational improvements with the legal obligations to ensure fair competition and transparency in awarding contracts. Misinterpreting or circumventing these regulations can lead to legal challenges, financial penalties, reputational damage, and delays in essential projects. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that meticulously analyzes the proposed changes against the relevant French legal framework, including the Code de la Commande Publique, Public Procurement Code, and any specific decrees or circulars governing public service concessions or works contracts. This assessment must identify potential impacts on existing contractual obligations, competition, and the principle of equal treatment for potential service providers. By proactively identifying and mitigating risks, Aeroports de Paris can ensure compliance, maintain public trust, and achieve its operational objectives legally and ethically. This approach prioritizes due diligence and adherence to established legal procedures. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate operational efficiency, without a comprehensive legal review, would fail to account for the mandatory procedures required for public procurement in France. This could lead to the awarding of contracts without proper competitive tendering, violating the principles of transparency and equal access for businesses, which are cornerstones of French administrative law. Such a failure could result in the annulment of the contract, legal action from aggrieved bidders, and significant reputational damage to Aeroports de Paris. Another incorrect approach that seeks to reclassify the operational improvement as a minor amendment to an existing contract to bypass procurement rules would also be problematic. French law has specific criteria for what constitutes a substantial modification that necessitates a new procurement procedure. Attempting to circumvent these rules, even with the intention of expediency, constitutes a breach of regulatory requirements and undermines the integrity of the public procurement system. This could be viewed as an attempt to unfairly favor an incumbent provider or avoid competitive scrutiny, leading to similar legal and reputational consequences. A third incorrect approach that relies on informal consultations with a limited number of potential vendors to gauge interest without a formal market consultation process would also be insufficient. While market sounding can be a useful preliminary step, it must be conducted in a manner that does not preempt the formal procurement process or create an unfair advantage. Without a structured and transparent approach, it risks being perceived as biased and failing to meet the legal requirements for market engagement. The professional decision-making process for Aeroports de Paris in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This framework should begin with clearly defining the proposed operational change. Subsequently, it requires identifying all relevant French legal and regulatory obligations, including those related to public procurement, administrative law, and any sector-specific regulations. The next step is to analyze the potential impacts of the proposed change against these legal requirements, identifying areas of non-compliance or potential risk. Based on this analysis, mitigation strategies should be developed and implemented, which may include initiating a formal procurement process, seeking legal counsel, or modifying the proposed change to ensure compliance. Continuous monitoring and review are also essential to adapt to any evolving legal interpretations or circumstances. Question 15. Analysis of a situation at Aeroports de Paris, where an employee is involved in the procurement process for a new security system. The employee discovers that a close family member is a senior executive at one of the bidding companies. The employee has not previously disclosed this familial relationship to ADP. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to take? Adhering strictly to French regulatory frameworks and ADP's internal guidelines on professional conduct and conflicts of interest. Option A. Discreetly investigate the bidding company's proposal for any potential advantages that might benefit their family member's company, and then proceed with the procurement process while omitting any mention of the familial relationship. Option B. Inform a trusted colleague within ADP about the situation and ask for their informal opinion on whether disclosure is necessary, proceeding based on the colleague's advice. Option C. Continue with the procurement process as planned, assuming personal relationships will not influence their professional judgment and that the bidding company's proposal will be evaluated solely on its merits. Option D. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the ADP Ethics or Compliance Department, requesting guidance on how to proceed and potentially recusing themselves from further involvement in the procurement process. Correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to their direct supervisor and the ADP Ethics or Compliance Department, requesting guidance on how to proceed and potentially recusing themselves from further involvement in the procurement process. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Aeroports de Paris, ADP, due to the potential conflict between personal interests and the company's ethical obligations. Navigating such situations requires a deep understanding of ADP's internal policies and relevant French regulations concerning professional conduct and conflicts of interest. The core difficulty lies in identifying and managing situations where personal relationships or financial stakes could improperly influence business decisions or compromise the integrity of ADP's operations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are transparent, fair, and in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict to the appropriate internal authority at ADP. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical business practices mandated by French law and ADP's internal code of conduct. By formally reporting the situation, the employee initiates a process where ADP can assess the risk and implement measures to mitigate it, such as recusal from decision-making processes or seeking independent advice. This demonstrates integrity and adherence to regulatory requirements designed to prevent corruption and maintain public trust in entities managing critical infrastructure like airports. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the business decision without any disclosure, assuming personal relationships will not influence judgment. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risk of unconscious bias and violates the spirit, if not the letter, of regulations concerning conflicts of interest and professional integrity. It could lead to decisions that are not based on merit, potentially harming ADP's financial standing or reputation. Another incorrect approach is to seek informal advice from colleagues without formal reporting. While well-intentioned, this bypasses established procedures and does not provide the necessary documentation or official oversight to manage the conflict effectively, leaving both the employee and ADP exposed to regulatory scrutiny and ethical breaches. Finally, attempting to downplay the significance of the relationship or potential conflict to internal stakeholders without full transparency is also professionally unacceptable, as it undermines the principle of honest communication and can be construed as an attempt to conceal a material fact. Professionals in similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to established policies, and seeking guidance from designated compliance or legal departments. This involves a systematic evaluation of potential conflicts, understanding the relevant regulatory landscape, and proactively communicating any perceived or actual conflicts to the appropriate authority within the organization. The goal is to ensure that all business dealings are conducted with the highest ethical standards and in full compliance with applicable laws and company policies. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that an employee at Aeroports de Paris, ADP, has a significant personal investment in a company that is currently bidding for a lucrative contract to provide ground handling services at one of ADP's major terminals. The employee is part of the selection committee responsible for evaluating the bids. Which of the following actions best upholds the professional and ethical standards expected of an Aeroports de Paris employee in this situation? Option A. Fully disclose the personal investment to the selection committee chair and recuse oneself from all discussions and voting related to the bidding company. Option B. Inform the selection committee chair about the personal investment, but continue to participate in discussions, arguing that their expertise is crucial. Option C. Discreetly sell the personal investment immediately before the final decision is made to avoid any appearance of conflict. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation and decision-making process, believing that the personal investment is too small to influence objective judgment. The correct answer is A. Fully disclose the personal investment to the selection committee chair and recuse oneself from all discussions and voting related to the bidding company. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Aeroports de Paris, ADP, due to the potential conflict between personal financial interests and their duty to act in the best interest of the company. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and avoiding any perception of impropriety when making decisions that could impact a company with which they have a personal financial connection. Careful judgment is required to uphold ADP's reputation and ensure fair dealings. The correct approach involves full disclosure and recusal from decision-making processes. This aligns with fundamental principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees in positions of responsibility. Specifically, it adheres to internal company policies regarding conflicts of interest, which are designed to prevent situations where personal gain could influence professional judgment. By disclosing the relationship and stepping aside, the employee demonstrates integrity and commitment to the company's best interests, thereby avoiding any potential regulatory breaches related to insider trading or unfair competitive practices, even if no direct financial transaction is involved. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the decision without disclosure risks violating internal ADP policies on conflicts of interest and potentially broader regulations concerning fair competition and corporate integrity. Even if the employee believes their judgment is unaffected, the appearance of a conflict can be as damaging as an actual one, eroding trust among colleagues and stakeholders. Another incorrect approach of downplaying the significance of the relationship to colleagues or superiors, while still not formally disclosing, is also professionally unacceptable. This misrepresents the situation and fails to provide the necessary transparency for appropriate oversight. It undermines the spirit of conflict of interest policies and can lead to accusations of dishonesty. Finally, an incorrect approach of assuming that because the personal investment is small, disclosure is unnecessary is a flawed line of reasoning. Regulatory and ethical frameworks often do not differentiate based on the size of the personal interest when a conflict exists. The mere existence of a potential conflict necessitates disclosure and appropriate management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive assessment of any personal relationships or financial interests that could intersect with professional duties. When such a potential conflict is identified, the immediate step should be to consult the company's code of conduct or ethics policy. If a conflict is confirmed, the standard procedure is to formally disclose the interest to the relevant authority, e.g., supervisor, compliance department, and recuse oneself from any decision-making or influencing activities related to the matter. This ensures transparency, protects the company, and upholds individual professional integrity. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that Aeroports de Paris is considering a significant expansion of its cargo handling facilities. A preliminary internal review suggests that the proposed expansion might have minor, localized environmental impacts. However, a full, independent environmental impact assessment (IA) is a time-consuming and costly process. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for Aeroports de Paris? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive, independent environmental impact assessment (IA), as mandated by relevant French and EU environmental regulations before committing to the expansion. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for assessing environmental impacts to the construction contractors, assuming they have the necessary expertise and will comply with all regulations. Option C. Conduct a brief, internal environmental review and rely on existing general environmental permits to cover the expansion, without a specific EIA for this project. Option D. Proceed with the expansion based on the preliminary internal review, assuming the impacts are manageable and can be addressed reactively if issues arise. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the expansion based on the preliminary internal review, assuming the impacts are manageable and can be addressed reactively if issues arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Aeroports de Paris due to the inherent conflict between maintaining operational efficiency and adhering to strict regulatory compliance, particularly concerning environmental impact assessments. The need to balance immediate project needs with long-term sustainability and legal obligations requires careful judgment and a thorough understanding of applicable French and EU environmental regulations. The correct approach involves prioritizing a comprehensive environmental impact assessment (IA) before proceeding with any significant infrastructure development at Aeroports de Paris. This aligns with the precautionary principle embedded in EU environmental law and French environmental codes, which mandates proactive identification and mitigation of potential environmental harm. Conducting a thorough EIA ensures that all stakeholders are informed, potential risks are addressed, and the project complies with legal requirements, thereby avoiding future penalties, reputational damage, and project delays. An incorrect approach that bypasses or superficially conducts the EIA risks significant regulatory and ethical failures. Ignoring the EIA requirement, or conducting it in a perfunctory manner, directly contravenes the spirit and letter of environmental legislation, such as the EU Environmental Impact Assessment Directive and its transposition into French law. This could lead to legal challenges, fines, and orders to halt or modify the project. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for corporate social responsibility and environmental stewardship, eroding trust with regulatory bodies, the public, and employees. Another incorrect approach might be to proceed with the project based on anecdotal evidence or preliminary, non-rigorous assessments. This fails to meet the standard of due diligence required by environmental law, which demands systematic and scientific evaluation of potential impacts. Such an approach neglects the potential for unforeseen consequences and the cumulative effects of development, which are key considerations in a proper EIA. The professional decision-making process for similar situations at Aeroports de Paris should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This begins with identifying all relevant regulatory obligations, including environmental, safety, and operational standards. Next, potential impacts of proposed actions are evaluated against these standards. When environmental considerations are paramount, engaging environmental experts early in the planning phase is crucial. If a formal EIA is required, it must be undertaken with rigor and transparency, allowing for public consultation where mandated. Any decision to proceed must be demonstrably compliant with all legal and ethical requirements, with clear documentation to support the rationale. Question 18. Research into the procurement process at Aeroports de Paris has revealed that an employee is involved in evaluating proposals for a new service contract. This employee has recently discovered that one of the competing vendors is a close personal friend, with whom they have a history of social engagements. The employee is aware of the importance of maintaining impartiality in procurement decisions. Considering the operational context of Aeroports de Paris, which of the following represents the most appropriate professional course of action for this employee? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the relevant procurement oversight committee, and recuse themselves from any further evaluation or decision-making related to this vendor. Option B. Discreetly advocate for their friend's proposal during internal discussions, subtly highlighting its strengths while downplaying any potential weaknesses, without explicitly stating the personal connection. Option C. Inform their friend about the evaluation process and offer guidance on how to best present their proposal to ensure it meets Aeroports de Paris's requirements, while still participating in the evaluation. Option D. Proceed with the evaluation as planned, confident that their professional judgment will not be compromised by the personal relationship, and avoid mentioning the friendship to anyone. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct supervisor and the relevant procurement oversight committee, and recuse themselves from any further evaluation or decision-making related to this vendor. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Aeroports de Paris due to the critical nature of regulatory compliance and the potential for conflicts of interest. Navigating situations where personal relationships might influence professional judgment requires a robust understanding of ethical guidelines and internal policies. The core difficulty lies in maintaining objectivity and ensuring that all decisions are made in the best interest of Aeroports de Paris and in accordance with applicable regulations, without any perception of favoritism or undue influence. The correct approach involves a transparent and proactive disclosure of the relationship to the relevant internal authorities at Aeroports de Paris. This allows the company to implement appropriate safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes where a conflict might arise, or to reassign responsibilities to ensure impartiality. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees in regulated environments, emphasizing transparency and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. While specific Aeroports de Paris internal policies would govern the exact procedure, the principle of disclosure is universally recognized as the cornerstone of managing potential conflicts. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the decision-making process without any disclosure, hoping that personal bias would not influence the outcome. This fails to address the perception of a conflict of interest, which can be as damaging as an actual one. It also violates the fundamental ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the employer and to uphold the integrity of professional processes. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly favor the friend's proposal without explicit disclosure, believing that the influence is minor and undetectable. This constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates internal codes of conduct and ethical standards that prohibit the use of one's position for personal gain or to benefit associates. Finally, attempting to conceal the relationship entirely and proceeding as if it did not exist is a direct contravention of ethical principles and likely company policy, creating a significant risk of reputational damage and disciplinary action if discovered. Professionals in similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency and adherence to established ethical guidelines. This involves first identifying any potential conflicts of interest, no matter how minor they may seem. Second, they should consult relevant internal policies and codes of conduct for guidance on disclosure and conflict management. Third, they must proactively disclose the conflict to the appropriate designated person or department within Aeroports de Paris. Finally, they should follow the company's instructions regarding recusal or other mitigation measures to ensure that decisions are made impartially and in the best interest of the organization. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that an employee of Aeroports de Paris overhears a confidential conversation detailing an upcoming, significant strategic partnership that is not yet public knowledge and is likely to impact ADP's stock price. The employee has a personal investment account. Which of the following actions best aligns with Aeroports de Paris's regulatory obligations and ethical framework? Option A. Proceed to trade shares of Aeroports de Paris based on the overheard information, assuming it will lead to a profitable outcome. Option B. Immediately report the overheard information to the Aeroports de Paris compliance officer and refrain from any personal trading until the information is officially disclosed. Option C. Discuss the overheard information with trusted colleagues outside of the official disclosure channels to gauge their opinions on its potential impact. Option D. Ignore the overheard information, as it was not directly communicated to the employee and therefore not their responsibility to act upon. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the overheard information to the Aeroports de Paris compliance officer and refrain from any personal trading until the information is officially disclosed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an employee at Aeroports de Paris. Due to the inherent conflict between potential personal financial gain and the company's ethical obligations and regulatory compliance, the need for careful judgment arises from the sensitive nature of insider information and the strict legal framework governing its use. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the potential insider information to the designated compliance officer or legal department at Aeroports de Paris. This aligns with the principle of transparency and adherence to regulatory requirements designed to prevent market abuse. Specifically, French financial regulations, such as those enforced by the Autorité des Marchés Financiers, AMF, prohibit individuals from trading on or disclosing inside information. By reporting, the employee upholds their duty of loyalty to ADP and ensures that any potential information is handled according to established protocols, safeguarding the integrity of financial markets and the company's reputation. This proactive disclosure demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, which are paramount in the aviation and financial sectors. An incorrect approach would be to trade on the information before it becomes public. This directly violates regulations against insider dealing, which carry severe penalties including fines and imprisonment. It also represents a breach of trust and fiduciary duty owed to Aeroports de Paris and its shareholders. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the information with colleagues who are not authorized to receive it, even if no immediate trade is planned. This constitutes the unlawful disclosure of inside information, which is equally prohibited by financial regulations. Such disclosure can lead to market manipulation and unfair advantages for those privy to the information, undermining market confidence. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the information and take no action. This passive stance fails to address a potential regulatory breach and could be interpreted as complicity if the information later surfaces and is found to have been acted upon by others. It also misses an opportunity to protect the company from potential legal and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's internal policies on insider information and a commitment to adhering to relevant financial regulations. When faced with potential inside information, the immediate steps should be: 1. Recognize the nature of the information and its potential impact. 2. Cease any personal consideration of trading or acting on the information. 3. Consult the company's compliance or legal department without delay. 4. Follow their guidance precisely. This structured approach ensures that all actions are compliant, ethical, and in the best interest of Aeroports de Paris and the financial markets. Question 20. Comparative studies suggest that airports are increasingly leveraging passenger data to enhance operational efficiency and personalize services. Considering Aeroports de Paris's commitment to both passenger experience and regulatory adherence, which of the following approaches best balances these objectives while respecting passenger privacy rights under applicable European Union data protection frameworks? Option A. Sharing anonymized passenger data with third-party service providers for marketing and service improvement without explicit passenger consent, relying on broad terms and conditions. Option B. Prioritizing the collection of detailed passenger travel history and preferences to proactively offer tailored services, even if some data is not immediately essential for airport operations. Option C. Implementing a comprehensive data collection system that gathers extensive passenger information for potential future analytical purposes, with robust encryption for security. Option D. Adopting a data minimization strategy, collecting only essential passenger data required for immediate operational needs, with clear consent mechanisms and secure storage. The correct answer is C. Implementing a comprehensive data collection system that gathers extensive passenger information for potential future analytical purposes, with robust encryption for security. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual at Aeroports de Paris to navigate the complex interplay between operational efficiency and regulatory compliance, specifically concerning passenger data handling. The pressure to streamline processes and enhance passenger experience must be balanced against the strict legal obligations to protect personal information. A misstep could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a breach of trust with passengers. The correct approach involves implementing a data minimization strategy, which aligns with the principles of data protection as enshrined in relevant European Union regulations, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which would be applicable to Aeroports de Paris. This strategy focuses on collecting and retaining only the data that is strictly necessary for the stated purpose, ensuring that passenger information is processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. It also necessitates robust security measures and clear consent mechanisms. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, safeguarding passenger privacy while still enabling efficient airport operations. An incorrect approach that prioritizes broad data collection for potential future, undefined uses would fail to adhere to the principle of data minimization. This would constitute a violation of data protection laws, which mandate that data collected must be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary for the purposes for which it is processed. Another incorrect approach, which involves sharing passenger data with third parties without explicit consent or a clear legal basis, would directly contravene regulations on data transfer and processing, leading to severe legal repercussions and a breach of passenger trust. A third incorrect approach, neglecting to implement adequate security measures for the collected data, would expose Aeroports de Paris to risks of data breaches, violating the obligation to ensure the security of personal data and potentially leading to significant financial and reputational damage. Professionals at Aeroports de Paris should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable data protection regulations. This involves identifying the specific purpose for data collection, assessing the minimum data required to achieve that purpose, and establishing clear protocols for data storage, access, and deletion. Regular training and audits are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and to adapt to evolving regulatory landscapes and technological advancements.